going to tell this as plainly as I can. The way a breath fogs a window and then disappears. If I dwell too much on the edges, I'll start doubting what I remember, and the truth here lives in the middle, between sounds that cut off mid-note and footsteps that don't leave dust behind. When we were little, my brother seemed like a giant who had landed by mistake in our tiny house. He was only 2 years older, but he had the kind of height that made teachers forget he was still a kid. I was the opposite, thin, feverish, the sort of child who always smelled faintly of menthol ointment and damp cotton. People said we looked like years apart, not months. Most evenings our parents were gone chasing a failing business and the refrigerator learned to echo. It made a hollow clap when you opened it, as if it were surprised to see anyone. That night hunger turned heavy around 8. Doña Ofelia, my mother's friend, usually stopped by with dinner, a saint in an apron, but she called to say she would be late. "Eat something, anything," she said. There was nothing to eat, and we both knew it. My brother climbed onto a chair and then onto his toes, reaching for the top shelf of the pantry like he was fishing in a dark well. From the couch, I watched his shadow wobble on the wall and pretended the noise from the street would eventually turn into our mother's keys. The door exploded inward before either of us could think. One strike, like the house had been slapped awake. A woman burst through, crying in a voice that didn't seem to belong to her throat, and ran straight down the hallway into our parents' room. She didn't look at us. Her hair stuck to her cheeks. There was a smell of rain and street dust and something copper. My brother jumped from the chair and hit the floor with both feet, then looked out toward the street. I saw his eyes widen, round and white like chipped porcelain. He slammed the door shut and turned the lock so hard the metal squealed. He didn't say what he'd seen outside. He grabbed me by the wrist and pulled me to our room. The air inside the house felt condensed, like the walls had sunk closer. In the hall, somewhere near the living room, a man kicked our front door with a rhythm that made the pictures on the wall buzz against their nails. "Come out!" he shouted, his voice wet with rage. "Come here, you can't hide." The door shuddered again. It sounded like bones. My brother shoved me into the closet, sat me on the floor among the shoes, and piled sweaters and a heavy blanket over my legs. The kind that kept mothball scent long after you aired it out. He looped one of our father's belts through the twin knobs to brace them, then fed it into my hands. "Pull if anyone tries to open it," he whispered, the way an adult would, measured and low. I asked him to stay. I begged him not to go. The man outside kicked the door again, and a lamp fell somewhere, and the house swallowed the crash. "I'm going out the window," my brother said. "I'll get Ophelia's husband. I'll get the neighbors. Don't open for anyone, not until I'm back." I heard the window latch click, then the scrape of wood, then his body moving through the square of cooler air. He dropped, and the sound he made on landing, half curse, half hurt, felt like it struck directly inside my chest. Then his footsteps faded into the street. The crying in my parents' room stopped like a hand had turned a dial. The man's voice, his kicking, the furious scraping, everything fell away in the same instant, like a record needle lifted. Time opened its mouth and held it open. I could hear myself breathing, the belt leather moving between my palms, the old closet wood creaking as I leaned back, trying to make myself thin as paper. The bedroom door swung open with a sigh that didn't belong to our house. It was the kind of sound you hear in bigger buildings, hospitals maybe, where doors are trained to move a certain way. Someone approached the closet and tapped twice, polite. I kept my breath crushed behind my teeth. The belt trembled. "It's me," my brother said on the other side. "Open up." He had just gone. Even if he'd sprinted, he would be at the corner now, maybe pounding on Ophelia's door, maybe shouting up to a balcony. The voice outside was his exact shape and pitch and patient irritation he saved for me, but he wasn't there. The closet smelled like dust and old perfume and the plastic of coat hangers, and I wanted to be so small I could fit inside one sleeve. "Promise," he said softer. "It's me, idiot, come see." The belt started to slide between my hands, not because I let it go, but because something on the other side coaxed it. It felt like I was holding a rope someone else had their fingers on. No tug, just the invitation of grip. I didn't decide to stop resisting. I discovered I already had. I loosened the loop and opened the door. He stood there smiling the way he did when he'd played a trick and hadn't yet confessed it. But there was a nervousness to it, a tightness at the edges that ran up into his eyes. "Come on," he said. "You have to see." The hallway was intact. The pictures were straight. The lamp was upright on its table. We walked to our parents' room. The bedspread had the same slack morning wave, untouched. No one was there. The window to the street showed its usual rectangle of late light and a cut slice of neighboring wall. There was no broken door, no woman with windstorm hair, no man with the boot that could split wood. My brother looked at me with a sadness that made him seem older than he was. "No one came in," he said, "but I saw her." My voice came out thin. "You saw her too, you locked the door." He shook his head as if he could dislodge a piece of memory and throw it away. He didn't tell me what he had seen outside, what had made his eyes widen like that. The house made a settling sound, the small groan of boards remembering their positions. And we stood there in the doorway, each holding a different version of the same night. Minutes later, Ophelia arrived with dinner, an alarm, and a wooden rosary that had rubbed smooth between her fingers over years of whispered prayers. I told her what happened while my brother stood behind me like a shadow that had learned to keep secrets. She looked between us, then called my mother. And after that, there were 9 nights of whispered Hail Marys in my parents' room. A novena stitched with candle smoke and the chalk-white scent of crushed matches. The rosary beads clicked like distant rain. The house seemed to breathe easier. We never spoke of it again in that house, at least not while my parents were alive. Years later, after they were gone and my brother was gone too, he went first, carrying with him too many unasked questions. I tried to pry tiles of memory up and see what had grown beneath. I have settled on a possibility I can live with. Maybe time slipped. Maybe something old slid into our night for a minute and then closed the door on its way out. Or maybe something not yet born passed through us, impatient to be. I tell myself it was the first. I tell myself it was a moment trapped and replayed, a woman running forever, a man arriving forever too late, my brother always, both leaving and returning, but if I'm honest. Some nights I hear the belt whispering through my hands again, and I'm back on the closet floor with dust on my tongue and my brother's voice outside the door, perfect and wrong at the same time, asking me to open. I went back to that house years later, when time had already collected a crust of dust over everything we once owned. The walls were lighter in color, as if someone had tried to repaint them but ran out of paint halfway through. The smell was still there, though. The same blend of damp plaster, wax, and the faint iron tang that always lived near the door frames. It felt like the house itself had memorized fear. I was there for my brother's memorial. The others said he'd fallen asleep at the wheel, that it was an accident. I didn't argue. I just stood in the living room where that woman had once run and where I had heard a voice that was his but not his. When I closed my eyes, I could still feel the vibration of his hand on my arm, urging me toward the closet, and the way silence afterward had been so deep it seemed to pulse. That night, after the people had gone, I sat in the kitchen with only one light on. The refrigerator, long dead, served now as a shelf for candles and old photos. A small picture of my brother leaned against a cup. The flame reflected off the glass, and for a second I thought he blinked. Maybe I was hoping he did. I began to wonder if what we saw had been real or if something else had used our memories to crawl into the world. I read about residual hauntings, those echoes of tragedy that replay themselves without awareness. Scenes recorded in the dust of a place, triggered by weather, time, or even grief. The scientist in me wanted to believe it. The Catholic in me wanted to believe something holier, that maybe we had glimpsed souls lost between confession and forgiveness. Doña Ofelia once told my mother that some spirits aren't evil at all, just unfinished. They repeat the last thing they did because heaven hasn't decided what to do with them. 9 nights of prayer, she said, to teach them the way back. That was her reason for the novena. And yet, as I lit a candle that evening, I wondered if 9 nights had ever been enough. I walked down the hallway, slow, touching the walls. The paint felt cooler in certain spots, especially near the bedroom door. I remembered how the crying had stopped the moment my brother left, how the man's voice had died at the same instant. What if time had folded there, making us hear an argument from another century? A murder still burning somewhere beyond reach? Or worse, what if we'd been the replay all along, actors caught in someone else's echo? When the wind pressed through the cracks, the house seemed to breathe again. I heard a faint knock from upstairs. 3 taps, slow like fingertips on glass. I didn't move. It was exactly the rhythm from that night when the woman had first pounded the door and my brother's eyes had widened. I could even imagine the pause between each knock, that pleading space where something waits to be let in. I forced myself to go upstairs. The hallway was thinner than I remembered. The ceiling seemed lower. There was no window in the spot where I had expected it, only plaster sealed long ago. Maybe we'd imagined it. Maybe time had edited the house and left me chasing a version that no longer existed. Still, my hands knew where the door to my parents' room should be. I pushed it open. Inside, the air was warm, heavy. The scent of candle smoke still lingered from the memorial. A single rosary hung from the curtain rod, black beads glistening faintly. I reached out, and when I touched it, I swear it was still moving, swaying gently as if someone had just brushed past. I whispered a prayer I hadn't used since I was a child. San Miguel Arcángel, defiéndenos en la batalla. The words fell from my lips awkwardly like stones. The floor creaked behind me. I turned, expecting emptiness, but the air had changed density. There's no better word for it. Denser, as if another presence had pressed into the room, curious or angry, I couldn't tell. The flame on the candle flickered toward the door, and then I heard it. A breath, soft and trembling, exactly like the one I'd felt on my face that night in the closet. "Why did you open it?" a voice whispered. It wasn't my brother's voice anymore. It was smaller, hoarse, and carried the ache of someone who's been waiting too long to be heard. "I didn't know," I said, though my mouth was dry. "You were supposed to wait." I stepped backward until my shoulder hit the wall. Wait for what? To close it again. Then the candle went out. The darkness wasn't immediate. It thickened first like ink spilled in water and then swallowed the room whole. I stayed there, gripping the rosary until its beads left marks in my skin. When I turned toward the hallway, the air thinned and I was alone again. The door behind me was open, and for a moment I thought I saw light beyond it. A pale shimmer like dawn through fog. But the window was still sealed shut. I left the house before midnight, leaving the candle unlit on the table. As I locked the gate, I looked back and saw the faintest glow in the upstairs window, a light that shouldn't exist. It pulsed once like a heartbeat. That was when I realized the crack in time hadn't healed. Whatever had slipped into our night all those years ago was still here, patient, tracing the same pattern again and again. And maybe somewhere between one repetition and the next, I would meet it once more. It's strange how faith and fear can live in the same breath. I crossed myself as I walked away, whispering a prayer not for the dead but for the living who stay behind with the echo. Because echoes can starve too, and when they do, they start looking for mouths to speak through. I was 17 when it happened again, though I didn't recognize it as again until much later. By then I'd convinced myself the house incident had been a trauma dream, the kind that children polish into ghost stories to give their fear a name. I had grown taller, stronger, and thought I'd outgrown superstition. My brother was gone, my parents distant, and I'd started spending most of my evenings in the youth group at the parish. It was a way to feel safe, I guess, to be close to light, to prayer, to order. The church complex was old, a patchwork of additions and sealed rooms. You could walk from the street into a narrow side gate, push open a rusted metal door that moaned like an animal, and then step into a labyrinth of classrooms and halls. There was a small auditorium, a storage room that smelled of incense and chalk, and a staircase that turned sharply to reach the upper floor where we met on Fridays. Sometimes I wondered how many people had gotten lost there through the decades. That night there were 10 of us, laughing, joking, eating cheap pastries while waiting for Victor, our adult coordinator. He was always late, but we didn't mind. The room had 2 windows. One faced the storage area, the other faced a smaller classroom used for catechism. From the second floor height, both should have been impossible to reach from the outside. That detail would matter later, though we didn't know it yet. Victor arrived a little after 8, smiling, carrying the same leather Bible that looked older than all of us. "Let's get started," he said, and we unfolded one of the long plastic tables. The usual chatter faded into prayer, discussion, the kind of harmless routine that makes you forget the world outside has sharp edges. It was almost 11 when the first knock came. It was soft, a single tap against the window that faced the storage room. We all turned instinctively. There was no wind. The glass panes were too high for anyone to reach. I remember the way our faces turned one by one until everyone's gaze met the same spot, as if we had rehearsed it. No one spoke. Victor looked at us calmly and said, "Let's keep going." His tone was light, but his hand tightened on the Bible. We tried to continue, but our eyes kept drifting to the window. The silence grew thick. Then came another knock, louder, insistent, like knuckles pressed against the glass from inches away. The sound traveled through our bones. This time, even Victor stopped talking. He stood, looked toward the window for a full heartbeat, and said, "Okay, let's wrap this up. They want us gone." He smiled, but it was a strange, tight smile. We began collecting our things. The chairs scraped the floor too loudly. Then Victor said something that made the air shrink. "Before we leave, let's pray. Take each other's hands. Close your eyes." That part was normal. What wasn't normal came next. "Keep your eyes closed," he said, voice firmer now. "No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, don't open them until I tell you." Somebody laughed nervously. Nobody else did. We formed a circle. I was between Daniela and Miguel, our palms slick with sweat. Victor began to pray, his voice steady at first, reciting familiar words. Then halfway through, we heard the heavy door to the room creak open. It was a slow sound, dragging, unmistakable. That door was metal, thick, and no one could move it quietly. Every one of us knew it. Daniela's grip on my hand tightened. Miguel inhaled sharply beside me. My mind told me to open my eyes, but something colder inside whispered, "Don't." The door slammed shut, hard. Victor's voice rose over the echo, faster now. "Don't open your eyes," he repeated. But this time it wasn't part of the prayer. It was a command. Then came the footsteps, light, deliberate, circling us, tack, tack, tack. The sound of heels. There were no women in heels among us, only sneakers, sandals. The steps moved behind me, around us, slow, like someone inspecting a line of soldiers. Every breath in the room synchronized, shallow and shaking. I felt the air change temperature behind my neck, colder, heavier. The smell of dust turned sweet and foul, like lilies left too long on an altar. Someone, maybe Daniela, let out a small sob. Victor kept praying louder, his voice cracking on each syllable. The footsteps stopped right behind me. Something touched my shoulder. It wasn't a hand exactly, it felt like a weight settling there, pressing gently as if testing my resistance. My knees trembled. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The pressure grew, forcing me down, inch by inch, until my spine bent. Then I heard it, breathing. Not human breathing, but a wet, fluttering rhythm too close, directly in front of my face. I could feel the moisture of it, smell the rot in it. The space between me and whatever it was couldn't have been more than a few inches. I clenched my eyes tighter. Behind me, someone whispered, "Victor, please." Victor's voice cracked. Hold on a little longer." Something brushed my ear. A laugh, soft and cruel, broke the silence. It wasn't laughter from amusement, it was ridicule, like someone mocking our faith. I felt my skin tighten, every hair standing. Suddenly a cry tore through the circle, Fernando's voice, desperate. "Victor, hurry, please!" Victor began to pray faster, words tumbling over each other. "Deliver us from evil, deliver us from evil, deliver us." Then silence. He exhaled once, long, as if waiting for something to pass. "Now," he said, "when I count to 3, open your eyes and run. Don't look back. Don't pick anything up, just run. 1, 2, 3. The moment I opened my eyes, the room seemed to tilt. The lights flickered like they were underwater. We bolted for the door, crashing into chairs, tripping over bags. The staircase groaned under our weight as we stumbled downward. At the bottom, the hallway was pitch black. Someone shouted for the light switch, but no one could find it. We linked ourselves by shirts, moving as one body through the dark, our shoes sliding on the dusty tiles. That's when we heard it. A single note from the organ in the room ahead, clang, dry, hollow, impossibly loud in the dark. No one touched that instrument. We all knew that. Miguel screamed first, then everyone else. We ran without thinking, slamming against the exit, but it wouldn't open. "It's locked," someone cried. "Victor has the key." And in that moment we realized Victor wasn't with us. The hallway went dead silent. Then another sound rose, the faint vibration of strings, as if unseen fingers were dragging across the organ keys, slower this time, teasing. From upstairs came hurried footsteps, Victor finally descending, phone light shaking in his hand. He unlocked the door and we poured out into the night like animals escaping a cage. Outside, under the yellow streetlight, we collapsed in the square. Some were crying, others whispering prayers too low to understand. The church bells in the tower didn't ring, but I could swear I heard them humming, low and uneven, like they too were afraid. Victor crouched beside us, his face pale. He didn't say, "It's nothing," or "Calm down." He just said, "Sometimes when you try to do good things, darkness listens too." None of us answered. That night, as I walked home under a bruised sky, the echo of those heels followed me in the wet pavement rhythm, tack, 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 and I knew something had found a new way inside. We never went back to that room after that night, at least not as a group. The church closed it for repairs, but everyone in the parish knew it was something else. Victor told us to take a break from the meetings, to rest, to pray at home. Yet silence didn't rest. It lingered, seeping through the cracks of every thought. For 2 days I didn't sleep. When I finally did, I woke up gasping from dreams where the hallway lights blinked like candle flames in a storm, and a door that wasn't supposed to exist kept opening just a little farther every time. I told myself it was trauma, that the mind exaggerates in darkness, that I was just tired. But even when the sun came up, I could still hear it. The faint tack, tack, tack like footsteps from the floor above me, though I lived alone in a one-story house. Sunday morning, Victor called. "We need to go back," he said simply, "to collect everyone's things." He didn't ask. He said it like a confession. When I arrived, only 5 of us showed up. The others had excuses, or maybe their fear had ripened into something heavier. Silence. The church looked unchanged, yet emptier somehow. The courtyard was damp from last night's rain, and the metal door resisted as if the building itself didn't want to let us in. The staircase groaned under our weight as we climbed. Every step felt like pressing against a wound that hadn't closed. At the top, the corridor smelled of candle wax and mold, but also of something else, like burnt hair, faint but there. Victor walked first, holding a flashlight even though daylight filtered through the cracks of the roof. When he reached the door to our meeting room, he paused. "Remember," he whispered, "whatever you hear, don't speak." He turned the handle. The air inside was cold, heavier than before, thick with dust that floated like gray snow. Our chairs were scattered, papers lay torn on the floor, our notebooks gutted, the pages curled and browned as if burned at the edges. My bag lay open, the zipper twisted. Someone or something had been there. "Who came after us?" Daniela asked. Her voice sounded too loud, wrong. "No one," Victor replied. "No one has a key except the priest. And he hasn't been here all week." That's when I noticed the organ. It sat in the corner, its wood cracked and dull. But a single key, the same middle note that had rung out that night, was pressed down. Not by a hand, by something unseen, something holding it there. Victor walked toward it slowly. I wanted to stop him, to tell him to leave it, but my mouth wouldn't move. He reached the instrument, placed his hand over the pressed key, and the sound stopped. He looked back at us, his eyes glimmering under the weak light. "She's gone," he said. "Who?" Daniela whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he bent down and picked up something from the floor. A small rosary made of red beads tangled around a black hairpin. He stared at it, then slipped it into his pocket like evidence. "Let's go," he said, "now." We followed without question. On the stairs, I turned once more toward the hallway and saw movement, just a shadow crossing between doors. It was slow, deliberate, like someone watching us leave. Outside, the sun felt strange, too bright, almost artificial after the gray interior. We stood there, silent, until Victor spoke. "There are things," he said carefully, "that stay behind when faith weakens. Sometimes they find gaps, places where prayers have stopped being said. That building, it used to be a convent before the war. Some sisters died there. The rest fled. The last one..." He trailed off, staring at the rosary in his hand. "She never left." No one said anything. When I got home that evening, I washed my hands over and over. The smell of wax and dust wouldn't go away. Later that night, when I turned off the lights, the walls began to hum faintly, as if someone were dragging fingers across wood, tracing old hymns that had forgotten their words. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of keys on a piano. 3 slow notes, one after another, then silence. My house didn't have a piano. I sat up, every nerve waiting, listening. Then came the faint tap of footsteps outside the window, circling, moving toward the door. My breath caught, and from somewhere in the dark, close enough to touch, a voice whispered, not angry, not kind, just tired, "You shouldn't have gone back." The next morning, I found dirt by my door, a small pile shaped like the mark of a heel. Victor never called again. The parish closed the upper floor for good. But sometimes, when I pass by the church after sunset, I see a light flickering behind the second-floor window, the one that shouldn't exist anymore. And I swear, if you listen closely enough, you can still hear it. A single organ key holding its note, trembling against the silence of all the prayers that stopped too soon. Weeks passed, but none of us really moved on. The parish started holding its youth meetings in the main hall, downstairs near the garden. The adults said the change was for safety reasons, but no one asked what that meant. I stopped going altogether. Every time I walked past the church, I'd feel that subtle vibration under my feet, as if the earth beneath the floorboards still remembered those steps. The rhythm of tack, 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 echoing like a wound that wouldn't heal. I told myself I didn't believe that what happened could be explained. Group hysteria, carbon monoxide, imagination. But faith doesn't disappear. It mutates. Mine turned into fear. One night, maybe a month after the incident, I woke at 3:12 a.m. I remember the time because my phone screen burned the numbers into my eyes when I checked. There was a faint tapping somewhere in my house, like a fingernail brushing glass. I froze, listening. The sound came from the hallway that led to my kitchen. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. I thought of that church window, the one too high for anyone to reach. My stomach tightened until it hurt. I got up, slow. The tiles were cold. The air smelled faintly of candle wax, though I hadn't lit any. When I reached the kitchen, the tapping stopped. But the door to the backyard was open. Just a crack, enough for the night to breathe through. The wind carried a scent that wasn't wind at all. Wet soil and something faintly sweet like rotting flowers. I locked the door, sat on the couch, and tried to pray. My voice shook at the first word. Padre Nuestro. Nothing. The words felt empty, like I was mouthing air. The next day I went to see Victor. He lived near the church in a small rented apartment that smelled of coffee and damp paper. His face had aged. The whites of his eyes were threaded with red. He listened to me quietly, nodding. "It's still following us, isn't it?" I asked. He didn't answer at first. Then he said, "Not us. You. Some doors open for everyone. Others choose a name." I stared at him. "What does that mean?" "Some people carry an echo," he said, his voice low. "They become the new wall the thing needs." I wanted to laugh, but I couldn't. My throat felt tight. "Then what do I do?" He handed me a small jar of coarse salt and a white candle. "Light this where you sleep, and leave the salt by your door for 9 nights. Don't pray for it to go away, pray for it to remember where it came from." He wouldn't explain further. That night I did as he said. I placed the candle on my nightstand and poured a small circle of salt by the doorway. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then the flame flickered, long and thin, bending toward the door as if something were breathing on it. The room grew colder. I could hear the faint creak of my old wardrobe expanding in the chill, the same sound a human throat might make before a word. And then, from inside the wood itself, a whisper, so low it almost wasn't a sound at all. "You saw me first," the candle snapped out. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, waiting for dawn, heart pounding so hard that it felt like it would shake the walls. When morning came, the salt line was broken in one place, just one small gap the width of a footprint. The following day, I went back to the church. The main doors were locked, but the side gate stood open. The garden was overgrown, the air full of the smell of damp roses. I followed the path until I reached the back wall, the same wall that connected to the storage room under our old meeting hall. A section of plaster had crumbled away, revealing older bricks beneath, the color of dried blood. Carved into one of the bricks was a shape, a circle with a small cross inside it, barely visible under moss. I brushed it clean. It was warm to the touch, not from the sun, there wasn't any. It pulsed, faintly like a heartbeat. That's when I heard the organ, just one note, long, soft, and deep, rising from somewhere above the empty building. I ran. When I got home, the candle I'd left unlit on my table was burning on its own, a single flame, steady and tall. I wanted to blow it out, but some instinct stopped me. The wax had begun to melt down one side in a shape I recognized immediately, a trail, almost like a footprint. That night I dreamt of the church hall again. The room was flooded with light, all the windows wide open, and standing in the center was a woman dressed in black, holding a rosary of red beads. She looked at me and smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly. Then she whispered, "Every prayer leaves an opening. You forgot to close yours." When I woke, the candle was cold, but the same phrase kept looping in my head like a broken hymn. You forgot to close yours. So I did what Victor hadn't told me to do. I went back again. I wanted to close it. Inside, the air was stale, thick with that same sweetness of dead flowers. I stood in the doorway holding the candle and whispered my brother's name. The flame bent backward as if reaching toward something behind me. And from the darkness inside the room came that same whisper, gentle and wrong. You shouldn't have opened it the first time. The candle went out. It had been years since I'd set foot in my grandparents' house. But when I finally did, the first thing that struck me was how alive it still smelled. Coffee grounds, damp earth from the courtyard, and the faint sweetness of birdseed. That house had always been full of noise. Cages clinking, radios playing old songs, uncles arguing about politics. But under all of it, there had always been another rhythm, softer, like something breathing through the walls. My grandmother hugged me, and for a moment everything felt safe again. But even as we talked, my eyes kept wandering toward the staircase, the same one that led to the room where I'd once seen that child. My grandmother noticed. You remember, don't you? She asked quietly. I nodded. Then you should know he never really left. Her words came out so naturally that for a second I thought she was joking. But then I saw the way her eyes shifted toward the ceiling, the way her hand trembled when she poured my coffee. When I was little, I used to tell them about the boy under the bed. He had dark hair, wore jeans and a checkered shirt, and never spoke. I'd argue with him over the television remote, beg him to share toys. My family laughed it off. Children invent friends, that's what they said. But the laughter stopped the day my grandmother saw him too, standing at the end of the hallway, watching us with the stillness of a photograph. Now sitting there again, the house felt smaller. The cages in the patio were empty, the birds gone. Their silence made every creak of the floor louder. I spent the night in my old room, the same bed, the same window that faced the courtyard. Around midnight, I woke up to a soft knocking sound from under the bed. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. I froze. I told myself it was pipes or rats or the wood expanding. But the rhythm was too deliberate. I leaned over the edge of the bed, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. Is that you? I whispered. The air changed, colder, sharper. Then from beneath the bed came a small laugh. Not mocking, not playful. Just the sound of a child trying to remember how laughter works. I jumped back, my shoulder slamming into the wall. The sound stopped. Moments later, a ball rolled out from under the bed. It was blue, covered in faded stars. My grandfather had given me one just like it when I was a kid. It stopped right at my feet. I couldn't breathe. I picked it up with shaking hands and placed it on the nightstand. It was cold, damp, as if it had been sitting outside in the rain. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I told my grandmother what happened. She didn't look surprised. He likes you, she said softly. He always did. Who is he? I asked. She looked toward the altar in the living room where a small framed photograph sat beside a candle that had burned halfway down. In the photo was a boy, 7 or 8 years old, standing next to a bird cage. His clothes were the same, jeans and a checkered shirt. "He was your uncle," she said, "your father's younger brother. Died before you were born. He fell from the stairs right there where you always sat watching TV with your grandfather." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "It was too long ago," she said. "But children know things. You saw him before you knew he existed. Sometimes the ones we forget refuse to be forgotten." Her words followed me all day. By evening, the house felt heavier, as if every object remembered something it shouldn't. The shadows under the furniture stretched too far. The mirror in the hallway reflected the room behind me, but for a moment I could have sworn it showed another version, brighter, fuller, with that same boy sitting on the stairs, smiling faintly. When night came, I lit one of my grandmother's candles. The flame flickered, painting the room in gold and gray. I sat on the bed holding the ball and whispered, "I know who you are." The air stirred. A whisper, faint as a sigh, brushed past my ear. "Then don't forget me." The candle flared, then died, leaving only the smell of melted wax and something else. Something like burned feathers. Downstairs, my grandmother started to pray. Her voice shook, half prayer, half lullaby. I wanted to join her, but my throat wouldn't move. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering the dry leaves across the courtyard. Each sound felt like footsteps retreating into the night. That night, I dreamt of the staircase again. The boy stood at the top, looking down at me. His eyes were hollow but not empty, they were waiting. And behind him, in the dark, something else moved, slow and patient, as if it had been waiting for both of us all along. When I woke, the candle on my nightstand was cold, and beside it lay the ball, split open down the middle, hollow inside. I didn't tell my grandmother. I didn't have to. She'd already placed a bowl of salt by the door. The next few days blurred into a fog of prayers, candle smoke, and half sleep. My grandmother kept the living room lights on all night. She said darkness made them braver. Every dawn she sprinkled holy water along the walls, whispering names I didn't recognize. But I knew her fear wasn't new. It was something she had carried for decades, the way some people carry a scar. On the third night, the smell of smoke woke me. At first I thought it was one of the candles. Then I heard shouting upstairs, my uncle's voice. My cousin's too. I ran up, and the moment I reached the landing, a wave of heat hit me. The room at the end of the hallway, the one with the blue and black blanket printed with a tiger, was on fire. Flames licked the walls, wild and quick, swallowing the curtains, then the bed. I heard my cousin scream. The extension sparked. But there was something else in her tone. Confusion. Like she couldn't understand how fire could spread that fast. We formed a desperate chain with buckets of water from the patio. Smoke poured down the stairs, black and thick, carrying that same smell I remembered from years ago. Dust, wax, and a trace of something sweet and wrong. In the chaos, someone shouted my name. "Wait, where's the boy?" "I'm here," I coughed back, but the voice came again, closer, panicked. My Aunt Susanna's voice. "I see him. He's in the hallway." I turned. There, through the haze, she was running after a small figure darting toward the far door. "Don't be afraid," she cried, reaching out. For a heartbeat, I saw what she saw. A child no taller than the railing, dressed in jeans and a checkered shirt, half lit by the orange glow of the fire. His head turned, and for a second his eyes met mine, bright and empty, reflecting the flames like twin coins. "Aki!" my aunt screamed. "I've got him!" She grabbed the child's hand and pulled, but as she dragged him forward, my grandfather's voice thundered from below, hoarse with smoke. "They're both downstairs, both of them!" My aunt froze. The figure slipped from her grasp like smoke sliding through fingers. I saw her face pale, her mouth open in a silent cry, and then the shape was gone, swallowed by the blur of fire and ash. Moments later, the electricity cut. Everything went black except for the light of the burning blanket. We kept throwing water until finally, mercifully, the flames gave up. The room stank of wet ash and melted plastic. My lungs hurt. My hands shook so badly I couldn't hold the bucket anymore. Downstairs, my aunt sat on the floor, trembling, staring at her hand. "It was cold," she whispered. "So cold." No one slept that night. We opened every window to let the smoke out, but even after the air cleared, a shadow seemed to linger in the corners, darker than the rest. By morning, the house felt empty again, but not peaceful. It was the stillness of a body after its last breath. My grandmother insisted we pray together in the charred room. She lit 3 candles on a plate and placed the cracked rosary beside them. The wax melted fast, dripping down like tears. "He's not angry," she said almost to herself. "He just doesn't understand he's gone." I wanted to believe her, but deep inside I knew it wasn't just the boy anymore. Something older had stepped through with him. Something that used his shape like a mask. That evening, as the light faded, I walked to the staircase alone. The wood under my feet groaned softly. At the top, a faint draft brushed my cheek, carrying the smell of wet ash. I whispered, "If you're still here, I remember you. You can rest now." Silence. Then from somewhere behind me, a whisper, gentle but sharp. "Not yet." I turned, heart hammering, but the hallway was empty. Only the flicker of candlelight from the burned room painted trembling shapes on the walls. When I went downstairs, my grandmother had fallen asleep in her chair, rosary tangled in her fingers. The TV played low, an old wrestling match, the kind my cousin and I used to watch as kids. On the screen, the wrestlers moved in slow motion, their faces blurred by static. Then between 2 frames, the image froze. The ring went dark. And standing there, just behind the ropes, was a small figure in jeans and a checkered shirt. I pulled the plug. The screen went black, but in its reflection I could still see the faint outline of that boy standing in the doorway behind me. When I turned, he was gone. That night I didn't dream. I didn't have to. The house itself was dreaming, and I was trapped inside it, listening to its slow, rhythmic breathing, waiting for it to wake up again. The rains came early that year, pounding the roof of my grandparents' house with a relentless rhythm that drowned out everything else. For days, the streets outside were rivers, and the sky hung low and gray like a soaked blanket. The city was drowning in silence and water, and we, those of us who had stayed, were trapped together inside the house that had forgotten how to sleep. That night, the storm was at its worst. The windows trembled under the wind, and every flash of lightning made the walls blink white for an instant before returning to their deep, bruised blue. The electricity died before midnight. My grandmother lit candles again, and we laid a few mattresses in the living room so we could all sleep together. No one said it aloud, but we were afraid of the upstairs. The adults played cards for a while, pretending to be relaxed, laughing too loudly. My cousins and I watched the shadows the candles made on the ceiling. They danced, sometimes twisting into shapes that didn't belong to any of us. The youngest cousin fell asleep first. My brother used to do that too, back when nights like this meant safety and not something else. The rain hammered harder. At some point, the sound shifted, less like water, more like static. Then underneath it came another sound, a low cry, faint, almost like a child sobbing behind the walls. "Just the wind," my uncle said. He didn't look up from his cards, but when the lightning flashed, I saw it, a small silhouette sitting at the far end of the room on one of the mattresses. It was motionless, draped under a blanket small enough to be a child. My cousin Chelly gasped softly. "One of the kids woke up," she whispered. She got up and crossed the room. The rest of us watched, saying nothing. She knelt beside the figure and spoke gently. "Hey, are you cold?" The silhouette didn't move. Lightning flashed again, whiter this time. Through the thin blanket, you could see the outline clearly. Small shoulders, a bowed head, knees pulled up to the chest. The fabric rippled slightly, as if breathing. Shelley reached out, her hand trembling. Hey, it's okay. The crying stopped. Slowly, she lifted the blanket. Nothing underneath. Just the empty mattress, still indented where weight should have been. She screamed and stumbled backward, knocking over one of the candles. Wax splattered across the floor like blood. The others jumped up, shouting, trying to calm her. I just stared at the mattress. The fabric was still warm, as though someone had been sitting there moments before. We stayed up the rest of the night with all the lights we had left. The house felt smaller, pressing in on us. Around 2 in the morning, the dogs outside began barking. At first it was distant, scattered, but soon the noise gathered, dozens of them, closer and closer, as if something invisible were moving through the streets, and every dog along its path howled in fear. Then the wind changed. The barking stopped. What came next wasn't thunder. It was a cry. At first soft, carried by the rain, then clearer, stronger. It was a woman's voice, long and broken, rising and falling with the storm. A lament that didn't belong to any living throat. It swept through the street, past the garden, through the windows. The sound filled the house, vibrating in the glass, the walls, my teeth. Everyone froze. My grandmother dropped her rosary. La Llorona. The word slipped from her lips like a secret that had been waiting too long. I had grown up hearing the stories of the woman who wept for her drowned children, doomed to walk the rivers forever. Her cry a curse to those who heard it too closely. But hearing it myself was nothing like the tales. It wasn't a scream or a moan. It was grief so heavy it made the air impossible to breathe, the kind of sorrow that could peel the soul from the body. The candle flames bent toward the door. She's passing by, my grandmother whispered. Don't look, don't answer. The crying came nearer, then paused right outside. For a heartbeat, everything was silent except for the rain hitting the windows. Then the voice rose again, right at our door, as if she were standing there, her mouth pressed against the wood, sobbing into it. Mama. The word was soft but unmistakable. A child's voice this time, echoing hers, repeating through the storm. Mama. Mama. I couldn't move. My skin felt frozen to my bones. The candles flickered wildly, their shadows stretching across the walls like reaching hands. My grandmother muttered prayers under her breath. My uncle picked up the nearest knife and placed it under the mattress, an old superstition, a blade to cut the evil away. The crying began to fade, first the woman, then the child. The dogs started again, farther away now. When silence returned, it was worse than the noise. No one spoke until dawn. We just sat there, afraid that if we did, our voices would invite something back. When morning finally came, the rain had stopped. The streets were littered with leaves and bits of plastic. I stepped outside into the gray light and saw a puddle by the front steps, large, clear, perfectly still. In the middle of it was a single footprint, small, bare. The water around it was warm. I didn't tell anyone. That evening when I tried to sleep, I heard a whisper right beside my ear. Not from a dream, not from the storm. A whisper that smelled of damp earth and roses, saying the same word over and over again, Mama. And then another voice, older, almost a sigh. We never left. By the time the sky cleared, it had been raining for nearly a week. The city smelled like rust and old blood. The air carried that silence that comes after too much water, when the world feels wrung out. My grandmother said the storm had washed away the bad spirits, but her eyes kept darting to the corners of the house where the light didn't reach. I knew better. Nothing had left. It had only learned to hide. I packed my things the next morning. The moment I told my grandmother I was leaving, she didn't argue. She just placed a crucifix in my hand, cold from her grip, and said, "Don't forget the prayers." I promised I wouldn't. but promises mean little when something has already learned your name. The bus ride back to my apartment was quiet. The mountains still dripped rain, fog clung to the road like wet cloth. Every time we passed a church, I caught myself staring at the crosses on the steeples, wondering if they were defenses or gravestones. When I reached the city, the sky was still a shade of pewter, and every reflection in the puddles looked slightly wrong, like the world underneath was a heartbeat out of sync with ours. That night I couldn't sleep. The walls of my apartment seemed to pulse with a sound that wasn't quite wind. I lit a candle the way Victor had taught me, whispered the prayers I barely remembered, and placed salt at every corner of the room. But the silence that followed wasn't peace, it was waiting. Just after midnight, the flame bent toward the window. At first I thought it was a draft, but then came the knock, soft, deliberate, 3 times. The same rhythm that had haunted me since childhood. I stood frozen, staring at the curtain. A chill moved across my shoulders like a hand made of cold air. Then came the second set of knocks, louder, more impatient. The candle trembled. I forced myself to pull the curtain aside. The street was empty, but the glass carried a reflection that didn't belong to me. A woman, her face pale and long, hair soaked as if she had walked through the storm that should have ended days ago. In her arms she held a small child, its face pressed into her shoulder. The reflection blinked, though I hadn't. Then both figures faded, leaving only my own wide eyes staring back. The candle went out. I don't know how long I stood there before the phone rang. The sound nearly stopped my heart. It was Victor's number. When I answered, all I heard was breathing. Slow, careful, like someone trying not to be heard. "Victor," I whispered. A pause. Then a woman's voice, soft, distant, the one from the reflection, said, "You opened it again." The line went dead. The next morning I went to the church. The gates were locked, vines crawling over the metal like veins. Through the second-floor window, the one from our meetings years ago, I could see something moving. Not a shadow, not quite. A pulse of light, faint, rhythmic, like a lantern swaying with someone's step. I called Victor later that day. His number was disconnected. When I went to his apartment, the landlord said he had moved out 2 weeks earlier, leaving nothing but a Bible and a broken rosary on the kitchen table. That night, I dreamed of the church, of its halls stretching farther than they ever should. Every door opened into another version of the same room. Candles melted down to nubs, chairs overturned, and that old organ humming a single note that never ended. At the center stood the woman from the reflection, holding the child in one arm and the red bead rosary in the other. She smiled when she saw me. "Do you understand now?" she asked. "What are you?" "I am what you left open," she said. "Every prayer you never finished, every name you forgot to bury." I woke gasping, the taste of wax on my tongue. The candle beside my bed had burned itself into a puddle, though I hadn't lit it. And in the melted wax was a small object, half buried, blackened, unmistakable. One of the red beads from Victor's rosary. I left the city the next morning. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. But even miles away, in places where no one knows my name, sometimes I still hear it. That knock, steady, patient, echoing through walls that aren't mine. And when it comes, I whisper back the only thing I've learned to say, though I'm never sure who I'm speaking to, my brother, the child, the woman, or the thing that wears their faces. "You can rest now. I remember." For a moment, the silence feels like relief. But then faintly from somewhere very near comes that same small voice. The one I first heard under a bed so many years ago. "We never rest. We only wait." And if you ever hear that voice yourself, soft, close, calling your name through a locked door, don't answer. Don't even breathe. Because some prayers aren't meant to be finished.